where they want it to go, and it goes where they want it to go. So if a grand jury, if it's left to a grand jury, isn't that just punting the ball? Can't the prosecutor charge these officers themselves?
Yes, you can in the first instance charge somebody by a complaint. You can sign a complaint, but then you have to present it to a grand jury in most jurisdictions in order to obtain a felony indictment, an indictment on any felony charge. And here's the thing, yes, Joy, we all have heard that a grand jury will indict a ham sandwich. Prosecutors can lead grand juries toward an indictment, and they can lead grand juries away from an indictment. But if they're doing their job honestly and ethically, then they actually let the evidence take the lead in the grand jury, because you don't want to use the grand jury as cover for a bad decision or a bad outcome that you are seeking, whether it's to protect an officer or go after an officer sort of more vigorously than the evidence would support. So we have to hope the prosecutors will do a straight up honest job, the vast majority of us do, and let the evidence take the lead. But that doesn't mean you have to spend weeks and weeks in the grand jury because you can charge these men. I have signed arrest warrants on much less than what I've seen on that videotape.
And I'm going to get the Congresswoman back in, but I want to go back to Benjamin Crump for just a moment. Just based on what you've just heard, you know that two of these officers have previous incidents on their records. What do you make of that? Because I know you have another case. You have 3 cases right now, one of which involves former police officers who prosecutors initially said, no, we don't want to bring any charges against them. In the Ahmaud Arbery case, it's not clear. The original charge against the boyfriend of Breonna Taylor, to say that he's the person who should be charged because he tried to defend his castle, tried to defend his girlfriend when strangers burst in. So this doesn't seem to work for black victims.
Well, certainly the grand jury process has never been a friend to unarmed people of color who have been killed by police. It seems that they changed the rules, Joy. When the prosecutors are prosecuting young black people, seem like they can always get a prosecution from indictment from a grand jury. But when we're the victims, whether it's Eric Gardner, whether it's Tamir Rice, whether it's Michael Brown, it's like they can never get an indictment. And that is the problem. That's why you sense the frustration of the citizens and the protesters there in Minneapolis, because we don't want you to continue to do this again. Polonus, Floyd, his brother, said, we're tired of black people being killed and nothing happening. I was listening to the Congresswoman, and I guess I want to thank in some ways for plugging my book, Open Season, to legalize genocide of colored people, because it's the whole criminal justice system that continues to intellectually justify the discrimination when it comes to equal justice for black people in America. And that's exactly what's happening, Joy. Regardless of the coronavirus pandemic, we're dealing with the pandemic we know far too much as black Americans, and that is the pandemic of racism and discrimination.
And Congressman, I cut you off and I apologize, but I would like you to speak to this both as a member of Congress, but also as a former state legislator who was quite high up. You're quite high up in the state legislature in California. Why is it that the law doesn't prevent officers who have serial incidents on their records of abuse of force from no longer being able to be police? Even these fired officers presumably could just go to the next town over and still be police officers. And I'm not sure the public would even have a right to know what their records are. So why is it that the laws, and I know you can only speak to one state, but why do the laws allow police so much latitude and offer so many restrictions?
Well, I appreciate you asking. I think that the police officers' unions over the years have been very, very powerful. Let me add an additional one. The fact that many officers, and you hear it all the time after there's an incident like this, what they say is that they were in fear of their life. And so the standard that is used to determine whether or not a police officer has used force appropriately is so low. I mean, how can you debate an officer saying, well, I was in fear of my life? I mean, the idea of police profiling, that has been a big issue. California is a very liberal state, Democratic legislature. They have passed legislation around profiling, but it is very, very difficult to pass legislation. It's done on a state level. We certainly are looking at a lot of different legislative ideas. And you know, of course, members of the Congressional Black Caucus have been introducing legislation around police accountability for many years. And so we will continue, but the major reason is because police unions in every state and organizations that push the agenda of police unions have made sure that it is very difficult to pass any type of legislation at all. You're called soft on crime. You don't care about the victims. And so that is the situation that we're in, but we absolutely have to keep pressing this.
What if people with type 1 diabetes had the power to manage their condition? Shortness of breath.
Men's clinic.
7 years, and looking back, I don't.
It feels like there just is an absolute lack of accountability.
You know, daylight is the best disinfectant, and if we haven't learned from the mistakes and the abuses that we see time and time again, that we need to have information about how police officers are conducting themselves, how police departments are conducting themselves, so we can make, informed decisions about who we want to entrust these broad police powers to. I think better vetting up front of people who want to take on the awesome responsibility of being a law enforcement officer, carrying a gun, carrying a badge, being able to order citizens to do this or don't do that. You know what? If you seek out that awesome power and responsibility, then you should expect your life will be an open book with respect to anything that might disqualify you from serving honorably and protecting the American public rather than doing damage to the people.
And do you expect, Karen Bass, from having gone through this, might we expect some of those protesters to be more likely to be arrested in the near future than the officers?
Oh, absolutely. But, one thing that is encouraging, though, from looking at the protesters is that that's a very multiracial crowd. And so people understand that this might be an attack on the Black community today, but they also understand their vulnerability as well, and they understand their privilege, the fact that they have a completely different relationship with police than Black people do. And so I'm encouraged by it, and I do hope, though, that they are peaceful, because the idea of them being violent and the idea of burning and looting and all of that, unfortunately, the area that they're doing that in, it only hurts the community. It is not the way to find a solution here at all.
Congresswoman Karen Bass, Benjamin Crump, Glenn Kirshner, thank you very much, and our great reporters Shaquille Brewster and Gabe Gutierrez. We are going to continue following this breaking news from Minneapolis and to bring you the latest throughout the hour. And coming up, Donald Trump continues his trumped-up fight against social media companies. I'll talk with constitutional scholar Lawrence Tribe and Tony
It could cut the number of visas for Chinese students studying in the United States and for Chinese government officials, which is not likely to go over very well. Mark Thiessen joins me now, American Enterprise Institute scholar and a Fox News contributor. Mark, always good to see you. What do you expect the president will say tomorrow? What do you think is likely here?
To his neck, unable to move or breathe. You can't see every vantage point, but the video doesn't come close to what police initially described, that Floyd was resisting. Surveillance video obtained by CNN from a nearby restaurant also doesn't show him resisting arrest. Donald Williams witnessed Floyd's brutal arrest.
His blood coming out his nose, and I'm noticing it now. At the point, his eyes is turning a different color, and he's talking about his belly hurts, which is pretty much your last bowel movement in your life. And so that's when I started, pleading with the officers.
Courtney Ross was Floyd's girlfriend.
This is nothing but an angel that was sent to us on earth.
and we demonized him and we killed him. I just want to get on the phone and call my baby and hear his voice. He cannot die in vain. Can't.
The 4 police officers now all fired, many calling for them to face charges. The officer with his knee to Floyd's neck, Officer Derek Chauvin, had 18 complaints lodged against him. It's not clear what for. He was punished for 2 of them. Another of the officers was sued for excessive force in the past. That suit settled by the city.
Do you think that was murder?
I do.
You do?
I'm not a prosecutor, but let me be clear. The arresting officer killed someone.
With businesses looted and burned overnight, Floyd's friends and family are pleading for justice and calm.
I want, everybody to be peaceful right now, but people are torn and hurt because they're tired of seeing black men die.
All right, and Miguel Marquez just joins me here on the phone from Minneapolis. And Miguel, you're on the phone because of things that are happening. What is happening where you are?
Yeah, it's just very difficult to get to our photographer right now. We're actually in St. Paul. We came down here because there have been ongoing reports throughout the day of looting, tear gas being used against protesters. We're in a shopping area near the Allianz Field where some local soccer team plays. There were buses, several buses, dozens and dozens of police officers in riot gear loading onto those buses. We're seeing fires off in the distance. This is St. Paul, keep in mind, fires off in the distance. Looting at the TJ Maxx and some of the stores nearby where we are. This did not happen last night in this area, and it looked like Minneapolis, where it did happen last night, was also starting to, people that were getting very royal. The news, or the lack of news, out of that press conference today from the U.S. Attorney and from the Hennepin County Attorney will not be well received in Minneapolis and St. Paul, probably across the state tonight.
All right, Miguel.
And what we heard from Secretary Pompeo yesterday is that this changes that. If they don't have their own authority.
At Vernite Honda, we deliver.
When we look at this situation now in Minneapolis, St. Paul, the George Floyd video, prosecutors have called it horrific and terrible. Saying his death is a disturbing loss of life. But they are not charging anyone yet. And they came out and said, and I quote again, Mayor, quote, there is other evidence that does not support a criminal charge. You weren't just the mayor, you were also an attorney in the Baltimore Public Defender's Office. You've seen everything that we've all seen on these videos. Do you know what this could be, something that does not support a criminal charge in this case?
Well, first, Aaron, my heart goes out to the Floyd family and the community in Minneapolis. It was a horrific act that the world witnessed, and we are all, I think, suffering right now because of it. As for what other evidence, I don't know. I don't think anyone has heard anything other than what we saw, which was a man being arrested, looking compliant, yet was placed on the ground. There were several people out there. I haven't heard anything, and I don't know if you have, from any of the other witnesses to suggest that there was something else going on that would require an unarmed, handcuffed man who was not moving at all to be restrained and murdered, restrained with a knee in his neck like that. I didn't see anything.
Do you think at this point there is...
Amazing, right? What is it? Actually, it's called purple.
Our descendants will unfortunately be reading about. And, you have to go back to the flu pandemic of 19...
For only $369 a month, with no down payment, and just your first...
...of racism and the COVID-19 pandemic is engaging in distraction and dissembling. He's creating a problem where there really was none. When Twitter said that there are some serious factual problems...
...idea was a hoax. You're leading the charge in finding out how and why this Russian hoax started.
The week of June 1st.
Many people actually believe that the whole thing was actually an attempt.
I was mentioning to the distinguished whip that and Mr. Thornberry and others that on one of those occasions he had a fellow prisoner of war there with him, and that bond is something so beyond anything we can imagine. Imagine the strength, the courage, the patriotism, just the faith in God that he had. So thank you for the opportunity to share some just personal comments about a really great man, always friendly, always smiling, always teasing about our political differences, but as always just being a model of greatness to all of us. Thank you. Mr. Whip, and I yield back to our distinguished witness.
Against the wall, then he sat down, then he's questioned, pulled back up, walked across the street. After the officers crossed the street, we see the door to the police car opening up. So have you seen anything in this, of all these different videos, that would show or even suggest that Floyd did what they said, which is to resist arrest?
I haven't seen it, and number one, I'm glad that there's a video, and number two, I am very glad that because those officers acted in very specific contradiction to police policy, and because the mayor could, those officers were fired. They are not going to be entitled to their pension. They're not going to be allowed, as in many cases, because of the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights in so many places across the country, prevent mayors and police chiefs from doing what happened in Minneapolis. That was not an option for me in Baltimore because of the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights. And reform, systemic reform in the police department, including taking off.
We're exactly where we start the month of June. Monday is June 1, and we really start to feel very summer-like. And finally, in Pierre, low 70s for tomorrow, upper 60s on Saturday. Still tracking a light chance of rain, mainly in the morning hours, so the entire weekend won't be a walk.
On Bash, one of our U.S. attorneys out of Texas, to do just that. Obviously, we know that unmasking inherently isn't wrong, but certainly the frequency, the motivation, and the reasoning behind unmasking can be problematic.
Carrie Kupak last night on Hannity from the DOJ. The Attorney General, Bill Barr, broadening the investigation now into the origins of the Russia probe, again, with new scrutiny on the issue of unmasking to supplement the ongoing.
Is critical to him is to dominate, and his primary advantage is absence of conscience. He has no conscience, so he doesn't care if people are hurt or if people, even in the case of the COVID cases, and I'm going to say this very directly, he couldn't care less that hundreds of thousands of people are dying. I mean, that tens of thousands of people are dying. He couldn't care less that an African-American man had a cop put his foot on Trump's that young black man's shoulder and neck and killed him. This isn't important to him, and that is an extraordinary advantage, and it's terrifying. It's terrifying to imagine, because if Trump believes he can get away with something, he will do it. So when we come to this election, should he be reelected, it now is clear to me that all bets are off, that we are in a situation in which this man will do anything that he believes he can get away with.
Well, and the thing is that the influence he has over other people is what I think scares a lot of people, because he in and of himself is just a troll. But let me let you listen just for a second.
Your home projects. So get the Home Advisor app and we'll...
For Trump, his name is Coy Griffin. This was back on May 17th, because I want to ask you something about the law regarding outbursts and statements like this. Take a listen.
I've come to a place where I've come to the conclusion that the only good Democrat is a dead Democrat. I don't say that in the physical sense, and I can already see the videos getting edited where it says I want to go murder Democrats. No, I say that in the political sense because the Democrat agenda and policy is anti-American right now.
But Professor Tribe, you've had Donald Trump say police officers should not be so gentle with suspects, and people in his crowds responding by saying about protesters, next time we might have to kill them, and threatening people and brutalizing people. You've had him encouraging these sort of quasi-violent sort of movements. You've had him accuse my colleague Joe Scarborough of murder. Where is the law on whether or not these sort of outbursts and pronouncements, where do they cross the line?
All of them cross the moral line. All of them cross the ethical line. We do have a dominator-in-chief who doesn't care who dies as a result of his outbursts. He's quite happy to see people suffer. He's vindictive. But under the existing rules, he can't be prosecuted as long as he's president. That's one of the things that gives him an incentive to cheat and do anything he can to remain president. I think where all of this Twitter stuff began, and this is important to remember, was his statement that he's basically not going to accept the results of the election unless he wins. He's been talking that way all the way back from 2016. Now he says the election is going to be rigged against him. He says that it's going to be stolen because voting by mail is inherently fraudulent. There's no basis for that. But what that means is he's going to claim, even if he loses the Electoral College, that he's entitled to stay in office. And I very much agree with Tony Schwartz. We've got to be ready, and I'm working on various legal strategies to get him out of there when he does lose, if he does, because he will stop at nothing to retain power, especially because he's afraid of being prosecuted for some of his many crimes after he leaves office. So we're confronting a rolling, ongoing crisis with a president who pretends to care about constitutional rights. There's a lot of colorful rhetoric about the great First Amendment in this speech. I'm surprised he didn't throw in the Second Amendment as well, because he's encouraging the use of gun violence. I'm surprised he didn't throw that in. We've got a president who's basically the enemy of the people instead of the other way around.
I wish we had more time. Professor Lawrence Tribe, Tony.
40 million people.
What has this virus done to your industry?
Nobody's working right now. 720,000 people work in film and entertainment in California. Filmmaker Jada Ploss is one of them.
The majority of our industry are, blue-collar workers who are showing up at 6 in the morning and leaving at 8 at night, and people who are living paycheck to paycheck, job to job. So it's really tough.
The industry turning to food banks to now feed their
potholes on the way. And we're really going to focus on that, and we're going to have integrity behind that so we don't, sidetrack from that opportunity. Because at the end of the day, if we have a safe community and we have strong roads and we have a strong
ratings, Kenny used to think working from home was a bad idea.
When I came to Nielsen at the beginning of last year, which had a work from home option, I was really quite opposed to it. The people who were in the conference
sign those unmasking requests and saying to them, Samantha Powers, Susan Rice, James Clapper, Marie Harfsel Boss, and say, well, why did you do that? Why did you unmask?
Is you like I should.
planet.
California has been especially hard hit because the state depends on
was not allowed to be with him physically as he passed away. But she did say she felt she was with him, and here's how she described that moment.
I thanked him. I thanked him for being the most amazing husband, and for making me feel cherished and loved every single day. Every single day my husband wrote me beautiful love letters in my lunchbox. Not just have a great day, but just beautiful letters about what I meant to him. I thanked him. And then I prayed. And then the doctor took the phone. And he said, I'm sorry, but there's no more pulse. And then I played our wedding song for him. And then that was it.
Joe Lewinger passed away 2 months ago today, and Maura joins me tonight. And Maura, it's impossible for anyone to understand how you're feeling every day with your loss. What can you tell us about these 2 months and your life now?
It's hard to believe that it's 2 months already today. I explain how I get through the day by saying that I pretend. I pretend that this awful thing hasn't happened to us and our family and our friends and community. I pretend that he's not going to be missing from every event going forward. That's the only way to get through the minutia of the day and being able.
Dr. Fauci basically said that he wears his mask because it's a symbol that people should see that that's the kind of thing that we should be doing. He talked about, having respect for other people and showing that respect by wearing your mask. What do you say to that?
I think that is not a sufficient basis to infringe upon Americans' rights, because what's going to happen, and there was an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal today that pointed this out, what's going to happen is they're going to tell us that because we're all wearing masks, we remain in this emergency, and therefore we must submit to these various COVID-related regulations. It's not about our feelings. It's about looking to your right and to your left and seeing your neighbor masked and thinking, life really has changed. I guess we're going to have other changes that will come along. I think that strategy is pretty clear at this point from the left.
Well, some people think that it is helpful in terms of just keeping things from spraying on other people, and that it's an extra measure of safety for yourself and for everyone else around them. It's interesting, the New England Journal of Medicine came out with this. They say, we know that wearing a mask outside healthcare facilities offers little, if any, protection from infection. Public health authorities define a significant exposure to COVID-19 as face-to-face contact within 6 feet with a patient with symptomatic COVID-19 that is sustained for at least a few minutes. In many cases, the desire for widespread masking is a reflexive reaction to anxiety over the pandemic. It sounds like they are
remotely because of concerns that they might contract COVID-19.
Well, it's interesting. I just did an event today for a terrific group of women in Texas who were trying to get more women on the ballot. And just to point out, Texas is a state where you cannot use your student ID as proof of citizenship, but you can use your license to carry firearms. And so it has a long history of really trying to repress certain votes and ensure that other people do. And to take advantage of this moment in time and try to push forward laws that we know are currently unconstitutional is outrageous. And I will tell you, from that phone call today, it was clear that the women in Texas are good and mad, and I am confident that they are going to certainly turn out on election day.
All right, well, we shall see. Valerie Jarrett, good luck when we all vote. That is an important thing. So best of luck with that. Thank you very much, and be safe. We'll be right back.
COVID-19 is hitting some Americans harder than others. Joy Reid examines how the coronavirus pandemic is particularly hurting those struggling with poverty, including minimum wage workers, meat packers, and farmers.
They're usually in debt up to their eyeballs because they can't pay for all the equipment that it takes to run a farm.
Joining Joy will be Bishop William Barber of the Poor People's Campaign and musician and activist Willie Nelson. American Crisis, Poverty in the Pandemic, Sunday at 9 on MSNBC.
The Hideout signature sound right there.
Fire, and if that's the case, they just simply don't have the resources to respond to it. I'm going to come back to what it is in the first place. You protect your vulnerable populations. You make sure that your hospitals have the appropriate equipment to respond to those. And at the same time, you measure out how do we make sure that essential services can still be maintained.
To listen to Senator Mike Round's full unedited interview, visit us at sdpb.org/SDFocus.
SDPB
was brought out because of Joe's message and Joe's story and Joe's light.
Well,
for example, you can get.
And that is our our show for tonight. Later on, stay right there. Rachel Maddow will be joined by the mayor of Minneapolis, Jacob Fry. That's tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern. You do not want to miss it. And this Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Bishop William Barber and I will host a special called American Crisis, Poverty, and the Pandemic, where you'll get to meet working class Americans who are all just trying to survive one of the biggest challenges that this country has faced in nearly a century, the combination of poverty and COVID-19 that's hitting communities of color and poor folks of all races, hitting them hard. So please tune in for that. Thanks so much for being with us. And I will be back here tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Eastern. All In with Chris Hayes is up next.
Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. At this hour, we are monitoring the situation in Minnesota, where for a third night there are protests in the streets over the killing of a 46-year-old man named George Floyd, who died on Monday. He died after he was handcuffed. He was pinned to the ground under an officer's knee, police refusing to relent despite Floyd repeatedly saying, quote, "I can't breathe." The killing of George Floyd, captured on video, has ignited outrage and protests that have continued to escalate into tonight. Floyd's family calling for the 4 officers involved in his arrest and subsequent death to be charged with murder. While the officers were fired within 24 hours of all of this becoming public, it has been 3 days and still no one has been charged. It's worth noting that unlike a lot of the protests we've seen over the last month, the pro-Trump, anti-lockdown protesters who've shown up with long guns at state capitals, the people protesting the killing of George Floyd from the very beginning have been met preemptively by police in riot gear, who've used tear gas and rubber bullets against the protesters. The Justice Department and FBI have promised an investigation into the 4 officers involved and said it would be a top priority, though the FBI held a press conference late this afternoon, which was strange, to say the least. We expected some sort of announcement. In fact, they appeared to think they were going to do that too, possibly about charges for the officers, but then it was delayed 2 hours, and then when they showed up, they had nothing to announce.
I cannot emphasize enough how important it is that all your ducks are in a row before you make that charging decision. But you can't undo what you've done if you rush. But if you take that time, you're going to do it right the first time, and you're going to get it done the first time.
That video is graphic and horrific and terrible, and no person should do that. But my job in the end is to prove that he violated a criminal statute. And there is other evidence that does not support a criminal charge. Please, give me and give the United States Attorney the time to do this right, and we will bring you justice. I promise.
George Floyd's killing has sparked protests across the country, including Memphis and Los Angeles, where protesters blocked a freeway. And this was a scene just a short time ago in Union Square in New York City. Police and protesters engaged in a violent confrontation. Police seen there shoving protesters. The situation in Minnesota is also escalating. Some have come out and also set fires, engaged in looting. I'm sure you've seen those images. Today, Democratic Governor Tim Walz activated the National Guard as community leaders urged calm. We're going to be monitoring the scene on the ground throughout the hour and throughout the night here on MSNBC. Joining me now, NBC News reporter Shaquille Brewster, who is live in Minneapolis where protests are taking place. Shaquille, what is the scene there like right now?
Well, Chris, what you heard from protesters and what you've been hearing from protesters all week long is that they will remain protesting. They will continue to demonstrate until the obvious solution happens, which in their minds is an arrest of the officers involved in the death of Mr. George Floyd. As you mentioned, we heard from the FBI. We heard from officials both dealing with the federal investigation and the state investigation, and they didn't have many answers. They preached and pressed and emphasized the idea that they want to be meticulous with the investigation. They want to
were doing something immoral, like protesting Gretchen Whitmer's coronavirus lockdowns in Michigan, that would have been a different story.
Black people's right to protest is secondary to white people's right to be an armed protest with long guns, terrifying looking war weapons.
This is how the protest of Floyd's death ended up. Police in riot gear flooding the streets with tear gas and shooting rubber bullets into the crowd. Another example of how this pandemic has been a kind of black light exposing all the inequalities in American life.
That's the meme that's going around right now with the cops with the black kid on the ground saying hello to the white guy in camo with the AK-47 and the mask who was protesting in Michigan. That when it's white people with guns and they're out and they're angry and they're faces with cops. Didn't see any of that. Everybody's civil.
It's as if some people are accorded the rights of citizenship and other folks are just expected to be obedient. These folks ended up in the state capitol, Craig, with automatic weapons, and they were treated with kid gloves.
Oh, you see, it's not at all like those fascists in Michigan. In Minneapolis, there's a reason people doing it. A legitimate reason. Even the cash register smashers, they were civilly smashing the cash registers, so relax. And by the way, the cash registers deserved it anyway. As Joy Reid suggested on MSNBC, they were probably European cash registers and therefore complicit in oppression.
Europeans came to this country to get away from being subjects of the kings in Europe. But what they did was they created for themselves sort of a kingdom, every man a king, but the subjects are black people, these armed white men who can get armed up and walk into a state capitol, and that's okay, and the police are benign. They don't even act afraid. But let black people show up and protest the death of an innocent black man, and suddenly, you know what, we need tear gas, we gotta go full force. Charlottesville, the same thing. The police were there to protect the people who were marching as neo-Nazis, not to protect the black people.
So who watches Joy Reid, you may be wondering? Well, it turns out the people who run Minneapolis apparently watch Joy Reid. As their city crumbled around them, local leaders huddled in deliberation. They emerged with a plan. They declared that racism is, quote, a national emergency. CNN immediately trumpeted the development as if it were breaking news. Meanwhile, mobs in downtown Minneapolis kept looting, stores kept burning, normal people of all colors huddled indoors, terrified. No one bothered to explain how any of this was connected. How exactly does racism have anything to do with looting ATM machines or stealing PlayStations from Target? It's confusing. What we do know is that riots are now acceptable because racism is a national emergency. That's the new standard. Okay, so now that we're in a state of national emergency, the question is, what is not acceptable? What's not okay? Anything? Here's what some of the, quote, protesters were chanting last night in Minneapolis.
Shoot the white folks! Shoot the white folks!
So you're not going to see that clip on CNN. How come? It's simple. Facts like this, and there are a lot of them, challenge the carefully constructed storyline that our leaders richly profit from. Therefore, those facts must be suppressed. For example, practically every day we're told that white cops are a mortal threat to black men, and some are, obviously. It's what started this whole thing. A black man was killed by the police. It's awful. But what are the national numbers on this? Well, actually, we know the answer. A study from last year found that white police officers were less likely to shoot and kill non-white suspects than non-white police officers were. In any given year, police kill more white suspects, armed and unarmed, than black suspects. And that's a fact, by the way. It's not political propaganda. It's provably true. Yet no one on television will ever say that because that fact threatens the scams they're working. Eddie Glaude Jr. might be the
so to speak. Tell me about what your reporting said.
Yeah, so Ira Tolles told me today that in 2008, Chauvin was one of several officers that responded to his house for a domestic violence call. The mother of his child called the police on him, and he said that without warning, the police entered his house, barged into his home. He ran into the bathroom. He says that Chauvin entered the bathroom, started beating him up with no warning, until eventually shooting him in the stomach. That was so close range that he still has a bullet wound and hole in his stomach today.
So this was in 2008, so this was 12 years ago. He shot him, he discharged his weapon, he shot him in the stomach at close range in his own bathroom.
Confirmed cases is now second only to the U.S., with authorities there reporting a record number of new cases today. Our Nick Payton-Walsh is in Rio de Janeiro for us. Nick, what is the latest?
Well, 26,417 cases confirmed in just one day, Anderson. That is a record for Brazil. A startling number, frankly, if you just bear in mind that that is not the entire picture here. Many doctors we've spoken to essentially say that you need 3 coronavirus symptoms to qualify for a test in Brazil. So when you say the number 438,000 positive cases in a population of 210.
Gently described them as protesters as they made off with his Hermes necktie collection. If thugs with bandanas on their faces smashed the windshield of his BMW with rocks, would Eddie Glaude call the police, or would calling the police be racist? Just how long, in other words, could Eddie Glaude maintain his fraudulent racial justice shtick in the face of the kind of violence that he routinely excuses on television? We're thinking not very long. That's just a guess. Let's hope Eddie Glaude is never tested on that, certainly anytime soon. Let's hope none of us are tested. The problem with outbreaks of mob violence is you really have no idea where they're going next. You can't know. Sometimes they subside.
That Chauvin, his name come up during the George Floyd case and said that at first he didn't recognize the face of the man that had shot him in his bathroom, but once he heard the name, it was very clear that it was the same person.
This police officer, as NBC has reported and others, because there's a public database with complaints, has had a number of complaints throughout the years.
Right.
There have been several discharges of his weapon. This was not the only time, I think, that he fired his weapon on duty. And if I'm not mistaken, I think there's been more than a dozen complaints throughout the years.
Absolutely. So the Communities United Against Public Brutality database, which you were referring to, has over a dozen cases against Chauvin that are complaints filed either by citizens or others, and many of them have to do with excessive force. He started in 2001, so throughout his whole career, he only got 2 verbal reprimands, and everything else was pretty swept under the rug. Some of the other cases that I think are pretty notable was in 2006, Chauvin was involved in a fatal shooting of a 42-year-old. In 2007, he was also one of 5 officers who was involved in a non-fatal shooting of a Native American man. Obviously, he had some run-ins that had some disciplinary actions in the past, but none of them warranted him getting suspended or anything, other reprimands.
So I'm sorry, just so that I'm clear. So there was a fatal shooting, and I'd seen that reporting. There are other complaints, and then there was a non-fatal shooting of the individual that you interviewed who was shot in the stomach in his own bathroom, and another non-fatal shooting?
Yes, in 2011, the officer was one of 5 that was placed on a 3-day leave for a non-fatal shooting.
What did Mr. Toll, I think is his name, the individual that you interviewed,
Yes.
What was his response? I know that he was surprised and didn't quite remember, and then he texted with his sister who said that was exactly the individual. His takeaway on what the situation is now.
Yeah, so I mean, today when I spoke to him, he was pretty angry that Chauvin was not only still on force, but he believes that if he was reprimanded for what he had done to him in 2008, that George Floyd would still be alive today. He told me that while he hasn't protested himself, he is one of many people in the community that are just completely fed up with the Minneapolis Police Department. He told me that, which I thought was very funny, that not only they had reached their tipping point, but if boiling water is 212 degrees, that the people in Minneapolis are at a 600. They're completely fed up with what's happening, and once he realized that it was Chauvin and that he had again done something that could have been easily stopped if he had been through the proper procedures, George Floyd would still be here.
It is not incumbent upon black people to stop racism, to stop this. It is incumbent upon people who hold the power in this society to help to do that, to do the heavy lifting. And guess who that is? Who is that, Chris? White people.
The funny thing is, as we often point out, these are the very same people who claim they're fighting your racism. Okay. But the problem is much bigger this time than mere hypocrisy. We're very used to that. This problem is far more ominous. Here it is in 3 sentences. There are 320 million of us in this country. A lot of us are very different from one another, yet we all have to live together. In fact, most of us want to live together. But suddenly our leaders are making that dangerously difficult. David Webb hosts Reality Check with David Webb, and he joins us tonight. David, thanks so much for coming on. I don't think anybody could watch the tape of the guy dying underneath that cop in Minneapolis and not feel sick, and I'm in that category. But I don't understand why, at a volatile moment like this, the people to whom we look for guidance and wisdom are making the problem worse and intentionally making people hate each other. Why are they doing that?
Tucker, you know, I watch you religiously. We work together, and for the first time, I actually really felt a little bit down as you were going through your monologue and the points and the various positions. But it goes right to your question. These are people who are not interested in dealing with the real issues in our society. This is a tragedy that should never have happened. We both know that. Americans know that. But they are using it. They are race and poverty pimps who are using it to foster violence, the tearing down of society. And in fact, if they were successful at tearing down of what we've done in this country, which is to evolve and advance as a culture that has overturned colonial racism, has rejected segregation, has opened up the doors to freedom for men, women, all ethnicities. And here we are discussing it again as people burn their own communities. And it is a sad testament to many out there that are doing this. You're talking about the cash register. How does that advance? How does breaking in, looting, burning advance your righteous cause and your righteous call for actual justice for George Floyd? How?
The issues here.
I think it's nearly 94% of our police force do not live here in the city of Minneapolis. I think that is highly problematic, but you know, I do think that the accountability, right, consequences for your actions is going to go the furthest. I'm in favor of these reforms where people need to live where they work. I'm in favor of us diversifying the police force, and I'm in favor of us changing our training. But at the end of the day, all that stuff goes out the window if somebody knows that they sort of have carte blanche when they go out to abuse the community.
Do you feel like there's a solution here? I mean, the short-term solution, the thing that protesters want, as my colleague Shaquille Brewster was saying, was criminal charges here in the case of what happened. But you know, we have been covering this. I've been covering this as long as I've been on television. We have seen case after case similar to this, often similar profiles, often officers with other charges before. We've seen it in suburbs, we've seen it in small towns, we've seen it in big cities, and in big cities with diverse police forces. We've seen it in big cities with not particularly diverse police forces. Like, as someone who is on the Minnesota City Council, and you think about what is the solution here, what are your thoughts on that?
You know, I hate to sound like a broken record, but I think that in every equation where you see an officer misconduct, and as you said, it's a huge issue all across the country in all settings. The one thing that people lack is that level of accountability. When officers commit criminal acts, they often do not receive criminal consequences, and I think that is the key ingredient here towards getting some level of accountability. You know, I think that the other solution, if I may, is for us to really do an inventory of what kind of 911 calls we actually get around the country. I know we are doing that here in Minneapolis, and figuring out which one of them require a police response. George Floyd, you know, it's alleged that he wrote a $20 forged check. So $20 of a forged check is what ended up being a death sentence for him. That's insane. Does a forged check require somebody with a gun to respond? Does a forged check require this level of violence? And does this whole situation warrant? Is it worth the amount of unrest that we're experiencing here in the city? I think it's not.
Yeah, Councilman Jeremiah Ellison, I think it's
machine marshable and drivable. I back my pill with it.
Spend the money and spend the political will and capital to be prepared to prevent the next spillover, the next outbreak from becoming an epidemic or a pandemic. We can do that with sophisticated, internationally coordinated systems of surveillance. Beyond that, even more important than preventing the next outbreak from becoming a pandemic, I think, is learning about the deep causes, taking the lesson about the deep causes of this. 7.8 billion humans on the planet. We're very smart, we're very hungry, we want resources, we want meat, we want timber, we want minerals, and we're disrupting the wild ecosystems of the earth. And as we do that, we're coming in contact with all these wild animals that carry all of these viruses. And as long as we keep doing that, we're going to be facing these spillovers and these outbreaks in the future.
Yeah. David,
for coronavirus as well. Minnesota is just dealing with a bear of an epidemic, with the numbers going the wrong way, with hospitalization and ICU numbers getting troubling, particularly in the Twin Cities. And now, of course, Minneapolis, particularly the Twin Cities area, is dealing with a whole other layer of crisis on top of that. Tonight, as we've been covering here intensively on MSNBC, the eyes of the nation are on Minnesota. Minneapolis is still reeling tonight following the death on Monday night of an unarmed 46-year-old African-American man named George Floyd, who died in police custody. Mr. Floyd was seen on tape repeatedly pleading that he couldn't breathe as an officer pinned him to the ground with his knee jammed into Mr. Floyd's neck for minute after minute after minute after minute. Since the day after George Floyd died, protests have been taking place throughout Minneapolis and in other cities across the country, too. These are some live images that we're looking at right now in terms of what's going on in Minneapolis tonight as we head toward nightfall. In the neighboring city of St. Paul, which of course is the capital city of Minnesota, they ordered the state capitol evacuated today. They ordered everybody at the state capitol to get out. There were violent protests today in St. Paul. This video was shot by an NBC News crew outside of a Target store where hundreds of protesters had gathered. Police were called after reports of looting at that shopping center. After officers arrived, demonstrators were seen pelting a police cruiser with rocks. They later took a bat to that squad car. There's no officer inside that car. It's just the car itself that's being bashed up and smashed there. Shopping carts were later thrown at police vehicles on that same scene as officers tried to form a wall in front of that storefront. A reporter for our local affiliate says that officers eventually did use tear gas against that crowd. The looting that has been seen so far has led some Minneapolis businesses to put up signs in their windows that say minority owned in the hopes that they will be spared from looting. This all comes after a particularly confrontational, chaotic, and at times violent night last night. Yesterday's protests in Minneapolis did begin peacefully, but things escalated over the course of the night and into the early morning. A standoff outside the city's 3rd police precinct eventually, within hours, spilled over into chaos, and some nearby businesses being looted and other nearby businesses being burnt to the ground.
George Floyd's life. And this incident is sadly being used by some to engage in abhorrent criminal behavior that is putting the entire city and neighborhood at risk. Take a look. That's not a way to build stronger communities and carve out a positive path forward for our kids and grandkids. So you looters, you rioters, that has nothing to do with justice. This can be a moment of solidarity. According to many reports, Mr. Floyd was turning his life around. George Floyd was looking for a fresh start. He lost a job at a restaurant after the state's lockdown order. He was trying to move forward with his life. These displays of violence, they don't honor his life. They do just the opposite. Burning down stores, looting, rioting, puts everybody in the community, people and the citizens, children, innocent cops in harm's way. It is destroying the lives of many working people and business owners who have already been struggling enough. We don't need more hate and hysteria amid this time of turmoil. Now, President Trump, to his credit, he acted immediately. He has ordered the FBI and the Justice Department Civil Rights Division to fully investigate this case. He said it is underway. He said he has ordered them to expedite this investigation. It is now, quote, a top priority for the DOJ, for investigators, and for prosecutors. Here's the president from earlier today. Take a look.
I feel very, very badly. It's a very shocking sight. Bill and I were talking about it before. It's one of the reasons Bill's here right now, because as you know, we're very much involved And I've asked the Attorney General, FBI, and the Attorney General to take a very strong look and to see what went on, because that was a very, very bad thing that I saw. I saw it last night and I didn't like it.
Unfortunately, that swift, decisive action is not stopping, of course, those that politicize everything, far-left Democrats, the media mob, and others from needlessly politicizing the trend.
Tone out here, you hear music, you do see the shells of buildings that were burned. I'm going to have you come with me down to where the main part of the protest has been all day, right outside the 3rd Precinct here in Minneapolis, and give you a view of the scene right now. And what you are seeing are still hundreds of people who are out here, but we were able to talk to 3 female community activists who have been in this neighborhood trying to make a difference. And they really had, with their allies, a real impact on how people were acted today, comparing it to yesterday. They tried to put what they call a human shield of their folks between the police and protesters, encouraging protesters to be peaceful and giving them a different way to get their anger out without being destructive, without looting. And we really did see a change. I want to let you listen to one of those activists who's been working on the streets here, who is from here, who talks about what it did to her as a mother when she saw this video. She's a mother of black children.
It broke my heart. It was devastating. There are no words in the English that will convey the despair that I felt watching that man life leave his body and him scream out for his mother. I heard my son saying, "Mama, save me." That's 11 and 5. My kids are little boys. And my son asked me, am I going to live to be a grown-up? He's sweet. He's harmless. I got to ruin his innocence and tell him how to exist as a young black boy in this country.
You can hear the emotion in her voice, and all of those black women that you saw standing there have been trying to make a difference in their community. They have brought in water, they have brought in food, they are trying to get medicines to people here, because one thing that is really important that we should share with you that hasn't been shared enough, this neighborhood here relied on these stores. They relied on the Target, they relied on the Cub, they relied on the Aldi. All of those places have been destroyed. They cannot be used. So getting groceries, getting things that you need, getting supplies for coronavirus, that's not available in this neighborhood anymore. So the elderly folks that used to walk here, folks that don't have cars, they can't get here, and that is going to be really devastating for a very long time, a long time after the protest ends. And that's what these activists are trying to figure out a way to try and help this community. This is really striking at the heart of so many things that are going wrong. And ultimately, this is about the reaction to pain, to absolute and pure pain and devastation, seeing this happen to yet another black man in America. Cuomo?
Sarah, do me a favor. If there's anything that comes up, you know how to get me. I'll come right back to you, all right? You and the team, stay safe. You know how to do the job as well as anybody. Thank you for being with me. All right, next door to Minneapolis, you've got St. Paul, the capital city. Fires are breaking out there as well. Stores are also taking the brunt of it there as well. People are throwing rocks. They are throwing bottles at police while breaking into buildings. The police have used tear gas. We have seen this many times, and we are watching it again. Miguel Marquez is there. Miguel, the current status?
Yeah, it's also the state capitol. We're about 2 miles from there, where they've also locked down that area as well. I want to show you what's happening right now. This is St. Paul tonight. Police in riot gear with their masks on. That is at least one business that is burning off in that location. What's been happening all afternoon is that there's several protesters on this side of the street that have come up toward the police and are taunting them. They are throwing rocks, they are throwing bottles. Police are firing back with either pepper balls, pepper spray, and they're using flashbang grenades as well. They are doing this because they're trying to protect firefighters who are trying to fight the fires that have been set up the road here. Down the road toward the Capitol, there are also other shops that are being broken into. Right across the street here, that's a Goodwill. Most of the windows there have been broken into, and people have gotten into there and taken stuff as well. It is absolute rage over what happened on that video, and people here are, this did not happen in this area last night. It is happening tonight, and it seems the concern is when that sun goes down, it is not clear how much longer police are going to be just holding their positions here, or if they have the numbers to start moving in and making arrests. We did see buses over by the soccer stadium here with dozens and dozens and dozens of police officers getting onto buses in full riot gear going to certain parts of the city. But it is pandemonium tonight here in St. Paul, and it's not clear that given that press conference today, it certainly didn't help bring the temperature down. Chris?
Art Miguel, also, as I said to Sarah, we all know how to do the job. We've all been in these situations, but be safe and...
neck. I mean, as I said to you last night, I'm actually stunned Mr. Floyd lived as long as he did. This was unbelievably dangerous.
Yeah, you know, and Geraldo, look at this. This happens so often. We had the cops assaulted in New York. We had other incidents where looting, rioting occurred in Ferguson. We remember Baltimore. We have videotapes. We can identify every single person that was in the Target and the other stores that were looted last night. We never go back and arrest them. Why? Because, like Dan said, if you get the person 1, 2, 3, 4, and people know there will be consequences, you're not going to have as much of this, in my opinion.
You know the worst of it, Sean? I've covered these riots from Asbury Park, New Jersey. Was my first story in the summer of 1970. I've covered almost everyone in the 5 decades since. And I tell you what, it takes a minimum of 10 years for these communities to recover from these self-inflicted wounds. Minimum of 10 years. Some never recover. And when you
death. What's your sense about the pace at which these developments are likely to roll out? I'm thinking about that not just because of interest in the process, but because I think it's going to have a big impact in terms of whether or not people feel the need to continually, night after night, get back out into the streets.
You're absolutely right, and that's precisely the conflict that we're dealing with right now. And I understand the necessity of having a thorough investigation. I understand the need to make sure that all evidence is reviewed. I also understand what I saw. And I saw the video that everyone else did. And what I saw was, again, 5 minutes worth of horrid conduct that is just wrong at the most human level. When someone is calling out for help, it's our obligation to help them, especially if you're an officer that is charged with protecting and serving the public. That didn't happen. And that's a failure.
One of the things that will be different tonight and heading into the next few days is that the National Guard has been called up in the state. The governor has declared a state of emergency. I understand that you may have had a role in advising the governor that it would be worth it to call up the National Guard. Can you give us any insight into that decision process and whether you're at all concerned that having that different kind of authority presence, having the Guard working alongside state troopers and police could be something that could be seen as further escalating tensions or further hardening the line between the community and the authorities that they're so mad at right now?
We did think long and hard about this as well. And I had many conversations with the governor to ensure that the presence is one of peace. The presence is one to protect these necessary community members and community assets that have become all the more vital because we're operating in 2 different crises right now. I mean, we're sandwiched between COVID-19, in which we've, of course, declared a state of emergency, and this horrible killing. And that combination, yes, we do need first responders. We do need to make sure that our city is protected. And we can make sure that those National Guard members that are in our city are positioned not as an occupying force, but one to protect these necessary assets for community.
Are you at all worried that the crowds in the streets are, I mean, we're looking at live images right now, and lots of people, if not the vast majority of people we're looking at, are wearing masks, but not everybody. Of course, people are not 6 feet apart from one another for the most part, and these are chaotic, if outdoor, gatherings that are happening. Are you worried that these two crises may dovetail in terms of the risk of transmission at these ongoing protests?
Yeah, if you're not worried about that right now, then you're not human. Of course, yes, I'm very concerned. We have seen the number of cases going up. We did a whole lot of work in Minneapolis and in Minnesota to elongate that curve so that we didn't hit the peak early on when we didn't have the necessary ICU capacity and ventilators necessary to accommodate what would inevitably come in terms of transmission. But yes, there is definitely a concern about hitting that peak in the nearer future, as we know that there are a lot of people that are gathering. And so, by all means, again, express your First Amendment rights. Please, though, wear a mask. Stay at least 6 feet apart, and it's about who we are in the city. A lot of the people who are protesting right now may not be that high risk, but it's about looking out for the rest of our community that may be higher risk, and that's why we're wearing masks and we're taking these necessary precautions now.
Tweeting, for example, Yoel Roth, well, the company's head of site integrity, really tweeted after the 2016 election, we fly over those states that voted for a racist tangerine for a reason. Does that sound like someone committed to fair, unbiased fact-checking? Hey, @Jack, that's your fact-checker. Does this sound like someone who should have a voice in deciding how to target a president?
The best evidence of what happened, right here, mounted from the perspective of the officer, supposed to be turned on as soon as there is any type of confrontation. Do they have that? We're told it exists. We have not seen it. This arrest happened 5 blocks from Angela Conley's home. She is the Hennepin County Commissioner for that area. It is good to have you on prime time. I am sorry it is right now, but I am not sorry that we are talking about what must be discussed.
Thank you so much for having me. This is a very important discussion.
Now, help me understand how somebody who means, I got to look at all the evidence, and then I'm going to put together my case, can misstate that by saying, there is evidence that shows that there was not a crime committed.
First of all, it's irresponsible to do that. We have been calling out County Attorney Mike Freeman. In my role as a county commissioner, this is my fellow elected who works down the hall from me, who is responsible. Now, the world is watching him and the decision that he makes. And for many, many years now, communities, especially communities in the north side and south side of Minneapolis, where I represent, have not trusted his decision making. So he's got to show us that he is serious about this, and misspeaking like that gives people doubt. We can't settle right now for anything other than a charge, an arrest, and a conviction. And quite frankly, it's taking too long. We have a video showing the murder of George Floyd, which to me is probable cause in and of itself.
A couple of questions, Commissioner. I want to kind of get an understanding of the head and heart that's at play in your community. One, do you trust that he did misspeak? Or do you think it was corrected after the fact and he said what he wanted to say?
That's difficult for me to answer. What we've seen in the past, we've had Philando Castile, we've had Jamar Clark, we have had Thurman Blevins, and we have seen how some of these remarks can be misstated or can be clarified later. But when you're in that moment and you are a leader, you are the prosecutor for Hennepin County, you are the DA, it is your responsibility to speak correctly. You have to have your words correctly. You cannot instill doubt into a community that is already hurting, that is already grieving in the ways that they see fit, by saying something as irresponsible as, "We may have evidence to the contrary." The evidence lies in that video, and we all watched all 8 minutes of it, and it is murder.
I understand prosecutors jumping to charging. That's their job, okay? They do the charging. But you raise a very interesting question. There are many members of your community that get arrested before they get charged. They don't get to wait at home until, even if they get fired for doing something at their place of work, they don't get to wait at home usually waiting to be charged. How is that playing in the community? That there has not been an arrest, meaning a finding of probable cause, much lower standard than anything else.
This really speaks to the history of over-policing, over-incarceration, racial discrimination, and anti-blackness that comes within the police response to historically black communities, communities who are living in poverty. These are black and brown communities, where officers come in and immediately we are profiled, we are harassed, and probable cause is instant. Probable cause is instant, and all the facts aren't always there, but this is how we are treated, and we have been treated this way for so long, which is why you see so many different expressions of grief. So what we saw with George Floyd was what we saw in the cases of Eric Garner, in the cases of the multitude of black men and women who have been killed at the hands of police for unarmed, for doing the least, and were killed for that. So seeing officers who are let off and being on paid administrative leave, of course they should be fired. But this is probable cause, which means they could be arrested tonight if it went that way.
And the officers have been fired, but the question is, why hasn't the criminal justice step been taken yet? We're waiting for answers on that. I get
Orange Jones investigative report talking to the families who lost loved ones in the nursing home scandal in New York and elsewhere. Straight ahead.
And the silver bullet has no lead. Get the Super Light 25.
We've seen it happen. We understand why it's happening. But let's have just real talk for 1 second, where you engage a lot of people in this audience who are part of the majority, right? We've got a minority and we've got a majority country. And it is like two different worlds to situations like this. And here's what they're being told, okay? Man, these African-American people, man, this happens every time. They overreact. They don't let the system do its job. The guy didn't comply with the police, and now they burn down their own neighborhoods. Doesn't even make sense. And they're creating crimes, and they're saying they're upset about crime. I mean, what is going on? That is a perspective that I deal with all the time. When I'm on the ground, this is very unusual for me to be sitting here in this closet that is a studio now and not be in Minneapolis. Obviously, it's because of COVID. And we have good people on the ground right now, actually better than I am. But what do you say to that perspective on this reality?
I don't think a lot of people understand mass incarceration. I don't think people understand the history of policing in our country and what it was designed to do. I don't think people are ready to say things like white supremacist, institutional, racist behavior. People aren't ready for that. It causes people to
They see one case. One case. Okay, it's bad. I saw it on video. This is a bad one. These cops are right to be fired. If they have to have a crime, I understand. This is bad. It's one case, though. What is all this other 400-year talk? Why do we have to have this talk?
Now in the day of social media where things are caught on video, we've seen over the last 5 or 6 years with the Black Lives Matter movement that now that things are becoming more within the public eye, we used to be killed, without video. And we would have to rely on statements from the police department and, the BCA, who typically investigate, internally. So we never had this sort of social media cry out, this immediate videos that show us in our face what's really happening. So it's not so much always, the past 400 years. We know what police were designed to do initially. And I want to say something else.
Please.
People have different ways of grieving. They're tearing up their own neighborhoods. They're doing that. There's a psychology to grieving. It's a grief process. People have a fight or flight response when we feel as though we're under attack. And the Black community has felt as though we are under attack for many, many years now. We do not have a lot of trust in our justice system. We do not have a lot of trust in our police department. So right now, we need city leadership, we need the state leadership, we need leadership like mine, who represents a very large and diverse district in South Minneapolis. Like you said, it happened 5 blocks from my door, to be on the ground, to be hearing from community and hearing what they want. And what I have heard after being on the ground for 3 days is that community does not have the trust that our justice system and our police departments should be earning from them.
Commissioner, literally as you're sitting here, your window is filling up with smoke from what's happening outside. You understand why I want to put what's going on out there. I don't want to hide from it anymore. You know what I mean? We dance around these situations a little bit. We try to make everybody happy. Can't make everybody happy because nobody's happy. So I just wanted to put it out there and allow you to respond to what a lot of people think, even if they don't want to say it. We're never going to change anything otherwise, unless we deal with the realities as people experience them. And as you said, you know, some people see rioting, you see a manifestation of pain and hurt.
Yes.
And this is what people do when they're hurt and they don't see any better day coming. And we've seen it again and again and again. When we change the cycle, we'll see. But Commissioner Angela Conley, I know that's your mission. And I appreciate you doing it. And thank you for taking on what you're up against directly. Thank you.
Calling to do so. Thank you so much for having me.
And you know I'm a phone call away. As information comes up that people have to hear about what's happening, what isn't, what's not being covered, you know how to get me. Be well. Absolutely. And God bless.
Be well. Thank you.
All right. Can't dance.
The best stimulus package. Americans reopen their doors, our businesses, let the economy begin to heal, and we learned a lot of lessons. We now should implement them. My next guest has some different ideas. Is the owner of the Mavericks, the Dallas Mavericks. He's proposing a use it or lose it debit card program to boost consumer confidence, stimulate the economy. Mark, good to see you again. Thanks for coming back.
Hey, thanks for having me back on, Sean. And let me say real quickly, your mass segment was incredible. Thank you so much for doing that.
The truth is the truth, Mark. You know, that's it. And this is one thing the country is agreeing on. There's nobody disagreeing on what happened. I think I might actually want sports more than you. I know we all want to return to normalcy. But you have more of a financial, but you're a billionaire. I'm not a billionaire. But the reason is, I think Americans are craving normalcy. We learned lessons. If we take care of the elderly like your governor did, Babbitt, or DeSantis did.
And they have done a couple of marches around downtown. Over my shoulder, I don't know if you can tell, but some of the folks have now started to do another march. They're going around and conducting some more chants. I can hear horns honking. But overall, unlike the scene last night outside the 3rd Precinct, this has been very peaceful.
Brett, let me ask you, in terms of the Hennepin County attorney, one of the things we talked about last night, and one of the things that has been a real point of focus, is the question of whether or not any of these officers are going to be charged. Now, Mike Freeman, the county attorney, said today that he needs patience. This is going to take some time. He also put out a call for additional evidence, particularly any additional video evidence from any additional witnesses. From your history covering these sorts of things,
Every week I go to the store, I see the same people.
Video evidence that everybody has seen that already exists of this arrest and Mr. Floyd's death.
Well, you know, I wouldn't necessarily, that's unusual for the Hennepin County Attorney's Office. Now, you touched on the Mohammed Justine Ruschek. That particular prosecution took a long time to get from the investigation to a charging decision. And during that period, there was a back and forth between the county attorney's office and members of the Minneapolis Police Department. There was...
Problem is, we spent $3 trillion already. $3 trillion for another $4 trillion in loan guarantees. The country can't afford this. We got to...
For a year and a half, doctor sent Gideon home.
Together in order to get prosecutions. Now, I also covered another case of a Minneapolis police officer who was tried and convicted for assault while on duty. And during that trial, that officer's name was Christopher Ryder. And during that trial, there was tension between the police officers who were testifying on behalf of the prosecution. During that trial, they were visibly reluctant to testify. And so it sounds to me that this may be another one of those situations. Mike Freeman is trying to shore up as much evidence as he can before he decides to make some type of charging decision, because it's going to be a tough haul either way, because the police are going to fight him likely on cooperating in a prosecution of one of their own. And if he doesn't decide to prosecute, well, the community response is going to be.
Brent Williams, reporter with Minnesota Public Radio. Thick of it tonight in downtown Minneapolis. Sir, thank you again for taking time to talk to us. We will be coming back to you in coming days as this keeps developing. Thanks again. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Fry was joined at his press conference today in a very dramatic moment by the vice president of the Minneapolis City Council. Her name is Andrea Jenkins. And when she stepped up to the microphone today with the mayor at this press conference, this is what happened. It was a very, very dramatic moment.
Amazing grace, how sweet is the sound that saved a wretch like me. We feel as if there was a knee on all of our collective necks. A knee that says Black life does not matter to the institutions that dictate what happens in this culture and society. I am a part of this system to help to take that knee off of our necks.
She is the vice president of the Minneapolis City Council, Andrea Jenkins. Ms. Jenkins is the nation's first openly transgender Black woman elected to public office. She has said that she believes Minnesota has some of the worst racial disparities in the country, and that is why she says she sought public office, to try to help change that. Well, now in the wake of George Floyd's death and the community grief and outrage, Andrea Jenkins is calling on state and local officials to declare racism a public health emergency. Joining us now is Andrea Jenkins, Minneapolis City Council Vice President. Ms. Jenkins, thank you so much for being here. I know that it is a whirlwind right now in your city. Thank you for taking time to be here with us.
Thank you, Rachel. I was happy to be here.
First, let me just ask you, we've seen you speak publicly over the past couple of days. We've been watching from afar, watching the streets of Minneapolis and St. Paul, and worrying, frankly. Can I just ask how you are holding up, and how you think your city is holding up now after what's been 3 very, very hard days?
Wow, Rachel. With this opportunity to be on national television, I do want to just take a moment to say, offer my condolences to the Floyd family, the brothers and sisters, the friends, the girlfriend. Words cannot express my deep sympathies. I, like the rest of my community, we're reeling. We're in deep pain. We feel that collectively our lives don't matter. The very people that we pay to protect and serve our communities, it seems like, it's looking at the overview as you led up to this story. All the Philando Castilles, the Jamar Clarks, Justine Damon, and there were many more police-involved murders that you didn't name. And so this community has been just really overburdened by being over-policed, by being disinvested in, and really our cries and calls for justice has seemingly been ignored, except in the case of a white woman who was shot by a black police officer. And any police officer who commits a crime should be held accountable. And certainly Officer Noor is being held accountable for his actions. And the officers involved in this latest police murder need to be held accountable as well. I was devastated when I saw the non-press conference because they didn't provide any press. There was no news. It simply was a lot of people talking in a microphone. And so I know that my community is saying, where are the charges? Why aren't these officers in jail right now until you get more evidence, Mr. Freeman? You know, you saw the video, Rachel, as did the rest of America. And in fact, the whole world. I've been getting calls from media requests from all over the world. People are really just fed up with this sickness, this virus that is racism, that is literally killing us. When I say us, I mean all of us, all Americans.
Let me ask you about what's been happening the last 3 nights in Minneapolis and in St. Paul. And we have seen solidarity demonstrations in other cities around the country now too, but it's been so intense in Minneapolis. It looks like it's going to be another very intense night. You've been so eloquent in calling for people to be constructive and peaceful and not destructive in their protests. But we've seen fires set, we have seen violent confrontation, we've seen stuff destroyed, we've seen stores looted. I guess the question is whether you think that there is receptiveness among the people who are out in the streets to channeling this in a constructive way, to channeling this in the kind of direction that you've been calling for, or if you feel like this is still going to burn for another night or more just because the anger is there, it's unrelenting, and there's no channeling it.
So, you know, Rachel, I've been involved in these rallies, protests, demonstrations for the past 3 days. 98% of the people have been peaceful, have been very succinct in their demands for justice, to have these officers arrested. And so I think the small number of people who are creating the violence and the destruction, and none of these protesters will be satisfied until we get a charge in this case.
Andrew Jenkins, Minneapolis City Council Vice President. Ms. Jenkins, as you say, I know that you have been getting calls from all over the world right now, in part because of your visibility, your leadership, and your eloquence on these issues. I thank you for choosing to talk with us tonight, and the whole country really is pulling for Minneapolis tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachel.
All right, we got much more ahead tonight. Stay with us.
Give them the shelter and the love they deserve.